Hey everyone, I am your host Peter Zablocki and you're listening to History Shorts. I hope everyone's having a great day so far and thank you for making this show a small part of that. If you'd like to help me out with a small gesture, please leave History Shorts a rating or a review and click that subscribe button if you haven't already done so. For sources and books used as the basis for these episodes, how to advertise on the show, and other information such as a list of our upcoming guests on the Conversation series, or a link to our Patreon account where you can listen to exclusive episodes not heard here, please visit www.historyshortspodcast.com. Today's episode is brought to you by the Podcast Republic, your ultimate podcast listening app. Discover and subscribe to thousands of podcasts from around the globe, all in one place. Download Podcast Republic now and take your podcast experience to the next level. Having said all of that, history is filled with eerie coincidences, but few are as uncanny as the one linking the RMS Titanic to a little-known novel published 14 years before the ship ever sailed. In 1898, American author Morgan Robertson penned a novella titled Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. The plot centered around an enormous, luxurious ocean liner named the Titan that strikes an iceberg in the North Atlantic and then sinks, killing hundreds of passengers due to an inadequate number of lifeboats. When the Titanic met its tragic end in April of 1912, striking an iceberg, sinking in eerily similar conditions, and killing over 1,500 passengers, many readers and historians alike were stunned by the similarities. The story of Futility and its apparent foreshadowing of one of the greatest maritime disasters in history is not merely a wacky coincidence, it's a window into the anxieties, technological hubris, and maritime culture of a changing age. Here is the rest of that story.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941,
it's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Morgan Andrew Robertson was born in 1861 in New York, a son of a ship captain. He went to sea as a teenager and spent years working as a merchant marine, which gave him first-hand knowledge of nautical life and the growing power of modern ocean liners. When failing eyesight forced him ashore, Robertson turned to writing. Though he never achieved widespread fame in his lifetime, he published dozens of short stories and novellas, many of which dealt with maritime adventures and technological innovation. He had a reputation for being meticulous in his details and for incorporating his professional seafaring experience into his fiction. Futility, published in 1898, is one of Robertson's most striking works, though it was little noticed at the time of its release. The novella tells the story of a ship named the Titan, the largest and most luxurious ocean liner ever built. Designed to be unsinkable, the Titan is equipped with state-of-the-art technology, opulent cabins, and powerful engines that make it the fastest ship on the seas. On an April voyage through the North Atlantic, the Titan strikes an iceberg on a foggy night and then sinks, resulting in the deaths of most passengers and crew. The disaster is exacerbated by the ship's inadequate number of lifeboats, only half of what would have been needed for everyone on board. If these plot elements sound familiar, that's because they mirror, almost point for point, the real-life tragedy of the Titanic. The Titan and Titanic were both described as the largest vessels afloat. Both were considered unsinkable, both carried fewer lifeboats than needed, and both struck icebergs in April on the North Atlantic route. Both sank bow first, and both disasters were marked by a grim human toll, compounded by overconfidence in engineering and the assumption that tragedy was impossible in the age of steam and steel. When the Titanic went down on April 15, 1912, after hitting an iceberg just before midnight on the 14th, readers and journalists alike dusted off copies of Futility with astonishment. It seemed as though Morgan Robertson had predicted the disaster with clairvoyant precision. In the weeks following the tragedy, newspapers reported breathlessly on the novel, labeling a prophecy fiction and marveling at its parallels. Conspiracy theories began to bubble. Was Robertson a psychic? Had he stumbled onto classified shipping designs, or was it all just an extraordinary coincidence? The truth is more complicated and far more revealing. Morgan Robertson was no prophet, that's for sure, but he was an astute observer of the era and an informed critic of human pride in the age of machine-driven progress. In the late 19th century, transatlantic steamship travel was transforming. Ships were growing even larger, faster, and more ornate, fueled by fierce competition between British and German lines, such as White Star and Cunard. Vessels like the Lusitania and Mauretania dazzled the world with their speed and scale, and plans were already being drawn for even grander ships, including what would become the Titanic. Robertson tapped into the collective imagination of his time, where dreams of mastery over nature mingled with subtle, rising fears of overreach. His fictional Titan was less a prediction of a specific ship than a plausible warning about the trajectory of real-world maritime engineering. He even pointed out the folly of safety regulations that prioritize space and elegance over basic necessities like lifeboats. As he wrote in Futility, the ship's builders had deemed lifeboats as unnecessary, a spoil of symmetry. An almost verbatim critique later leveled against the Titanic's designers and the White Star Line. In the later editions of the book, published after 1912, Robertson expanded the story and altered some details, giving critics the false impression that he had retrofitted the narrative to better match real-world events. But the original 1898 version was already crazy close to the truth. In it, the Titan is described as 800 feet long. The Titanic was 882. The Titan could travel at 25 knots, the Titanic at 23. Both carried around 2,500 passengers. Both hit an iceberg on the starboard side in mid-April. In a particularly haunting line, Robertson wrote, and I quote, "Unsinkable, indestructible, she carried as few lifeboats as would satisfy the law," end quote, foreshadowing the Titanic's 20 lifeboats for the over 2,200 people. Robertson himself, when confronted with the eerie similarities, denied any supernatural knowledge. "I know what I'm writing about, that's all," he told reporters. Yet the sensation surrounding Futility only grew in the years following the Titanic disaster. The novella became a cult classic, cited in lectures, articles, and even sermons as an example of divine warning or cosmic irony. The idea that a forgotten novel could anticipate the most catastrophic peacetime maritime disaster of the 20th century became part of the Titanic lore, a symbol of fate, or at least the hubris of ignoring warning signs. But Futility wasn't the only time Robertson played with futuristic themes. In 1914, he published a short story called Beyond the Spectrum, which envisioned a war between the United States and Japan involving surprise attacks and aircraft carriers, an uncanny anticipation of the attack on Pearl Harbor nearly 3 decades later. In both cases, his fiction seems to dance along the edge of prophecy, but it would be a mistake to view Robertson as a seer. Rather, he was a man deeply tuned to the technological shifts and geopolitical tensions of his time, using fiction to explore what might happen when human ambition outpaces human caution. The story of Futility and the Titanic speaks to larger patterns in history. Throughout time, humans have produced literature that often unintentionally foreshadows real events. H.G. Wells imagined aerial bombing before World War I. Julius Verne envisioned submarines and moon travel long before they were real. What sets Futility apart is not merely its predictive power, but its moral core. Robertson wasn't just telling a story about a sinking ship. He was warning about the arrogance, about blind trust in machines, about the illusion of invulnerability. Indeed, the Titanic itself was born of such illusion. The ship's builders at Harland and Wolff designed it with watertight compartments and reinforced hull planting that gave rise to the infamous claim of unsinkability, though the word was never used in official White Star Line promotional material until after the disaster. Still, the belief had taken hold. As passenger Margaret Brown later recalled, it was whispered nothing could sink her. She was the wonder of the age. The tragedy then was not only in the loss of life, but in the shattering of a myth. Morgan Robertson's Futility is, in a way, a ghost ship that sailed ahead of Titanic. Though made of ink and imagination rather than rivets and steel, it carried with it a warning that went unheeded. The wacky coincidence of its similarities to real events is perhaps best understood not as a supernatural fluke, but as a reminder of fiction's power to mirror truth, and of history's habit of rhyming when pride, innovation, and oversight collide. Thanks for listening.